All right. Well, I think we can get started. I want to be sensitive to people's time, but thank you for joining the first of what we hope will be regular webinars from the Institute for Family Studies. And in light of Brad Wilcox's recent piece in Compact magazine called "Get Married Young," which we can put in the chat just for reference, we figured we would convene an initial webinar. And thanks to all of you for joining us. So let me start by introducing our presenters, and then I've got a couple questions for them. And then we also, as you know, fielded some questions in the registration form. So let me start with Brad Wilcox, is the Melville Foundation Jefferson Scholars Foundation University Professor of Sociology and Director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. He's also co-founder, Senior Fellow, and Director of the Get Married Initiative here at the Institute for Family Studies, and a non-resident Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. In 2024, Brad authored Get Married, Why Americans Should Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization. Wilcox studies marital quality, marital stability, and the impact of strong and stable marriages upon men, women, and children. He's the author of and editor of 6 books, has written for scientific journals such as the American Sociological Review, the Journal of Marriage and Family, and then popular outlets such as the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and National Review. And then we have Grant Bailey as a research fellow for the Get Married Initiative at the Institute for Family Studies. He also edits our IFS Insights, which is a new content feature that we rolled out this past fall that presents charts with brief analysis that we publish twice each week. His writing has been published in Deseret News and Family Studies and featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, and Fox News. And then finally, Janet Erickson is an associate professor at Brigham Young University, a fellow at BYU's Wheatley Institution, and a non-resident fellow with the Institute for Family Studies. Erickson's research specializes in maternal and child well-being in the context of work and family. She has also been featured in a number of major news outlets, including the New York Times. So Brad, I come to you first just for a high-level question based on your piece. Specifically, when are young adults aiming to marry today? Specifically, at what age and why are these young adults choosing to marry?
Yeah, thanks, Carter. It's great to be with all of you today. And so what we're seeing both in terms of kind of the trends in polling and trends in terms of when people are kind of putting a ring on it is they're kind of aiming for around 30. And this is certainly kind of the view that most of my students at the University of Virginia also have. They think that's kind of the best time to get married. They have kind of like a capstone model, as we call it in sociology, where the idea is that you get your education taken care of, you get launched into adulthood pretty successfully, you've got a decent career, and then you kind of can think about getting serious about marriage. That's, again, the capstone model for a lot of my students at UVA and a lot of younger adults more generally. So I think part of the thinking here, Carter, too, is that sort of what matters most is sort of education and work. If you kind of can get those things on the right track, then you can kind of turn your thoughts to love and marriage. And so I spoke, for instance, one of my students at UVA named Lillian, and she said that her parents really were angry. She said maybe heartbroken when she told them that she was going to be getting married in the next year. And their thought was, that their daughter should be kind of seeing the world, in her words, working for a while and realizing her own potential. And she spoke also, Carter, to a professor about her plans for marriage. And he said to her, about getting married at age 22, he said, "You're throwing your whole life away. Why would I help you get a job if you're not going to be working that long? You could be something really cool on Wall Street, and you're choosing marriage instead." So it kind of gives you a sense, Carter, of how kind of this capstone model is pretty firmly entrenched among a lot of parents and among a lot of professors, and obviously among a lot of her peers at UVA. And the thought again is we should wait until you're around 30 to put a ring on it. And by contrast, in my article for Compact, I'm suggesting that young adults today should be thinking about getting married in their 20s.
So yeah, Brad, just to follow up on that, why is that not the right approach? Why shouldn't we kind of get our ducks in a row before we get married?
Well, I think both Grant and Janet are going to be talking to you about some of the issues in play here. But I just want to underline one big factor that I think most of my students and most young adults and most parents of young adults have really not fully internalized. And that's this idea that the dating culture today for young adults is deeply dysfunctional. We just released a report, with the Wheatley Institute, basically telling us that about, 2 and 3 young adults today who are eligible to date are not dating. We've also done research with Lyman Stone, kind of suggesting that about 1 in 3 young adults today will never marry. So the point I would sort of make to young adults today is, look, the dating culture is deeply problematic. And so if you are able to find, a good friend, in college or working somewhere in your 20s or at your church in your early 20s, for instance, I actually think, really prudent to be thinking about marriage, recognizing that it's really probably, not going to be the case. You kind of can just turn 28, snap your fingers, and find the perfect partner. So again, in this newer context where dating is much more challenging, this sort of post-digital world we're living in, I think it's much more prudent for folks to kind of look around in their colleges, if they're in a college or university, their workplace, if they're in their early 20s, or at a church community, and try to find someone who would be, a good prospect for dating and then potentially down the road for marriage.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, that's helpful. So Grant, obviously we talk and hear a lot about the risks of getting married young, and that's part of what Brad's piece addresses. But are there risks associated with waiting to get married?
Yeah, so when we released this piece, one of the most striking findings was we did an analysis of retrospective fertility data, so among women ages 46 to 50, and we found that those women who were childless through the age of 30, just 50% of them went on to have children. So when we're thinking about marriage, we're thinking about the whole family formation process. And as the research of Lyman Stone has shown, in America and across the world, men and women are coming under their fertility goals. So one of the risks that comes with delaying, right, not aiming for marriage in your 20s, but putting it off till later, is you have just lower chances of getting all your ducks in a row when it comes to family formation, right? I think Brad was talking about all the different things that go into getting married and having children that you can't just do with a snap of a finger. So just keeping that in mind, like with the dating recession, right? It's a hard landscape out there for dating and dating in your 30s. And then also you're butting up against sort of fertility challenges if you wait into your 30s. So we looked at one study that found in 2015 that couples that wanted a 90% chance of conceiving at least one child should start no later than age 32. So if you're starting to look to get married in your early 30s, you're butting up against 32 really quickly.
Right. Thanks, Grant. So in terms of Janet, in terms of the cornerstone model of marriage, as Brad mentioned, what are some of the advantages of that model as opposed to the capstone model of getting married once you have more of your ducks in a row?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I can speak specifically around women and a cornerstone idea for women. I think we've had this assumption that marriage is good for men, but it might not be good for women. And we can tell from the data, the GSS and data we've gathered with the Institute for Family Studies and Wheatley Institute, that that's just not the case, that women also benefit from marriage so much. And we see it in terms of a host of outcomes. So I think it's interesting that we've created this period where you leave your house at 18, you go to college, and then you're untethered from kind of close family relationships starting then. And then you have what we'll call sometimes a wilderness where you're untethered to strong relationships across a growing or longer period of time. And I think what it does is it creates dynamics that actually are not facilitative to strong relationships down the road in many ways. as well as being in a place of loneliness, less meaning and identity. I think when Tyler Vanderweel was really articulate in this crisis of meaning and identity that we're experiencing among our young adults, where happiness has actually decreased, the likelihood of being very happy has decreased over time. That's tied to relationships. It's that lack of deeply bound, committed, loving relationships that are so important for human flourishing, that are kind of the seedbed actually for thriving. We can see how it shapes people in terms of their ability to provide and invest and grow in all of these ways, because they're bound in relationships of commitment and love. And so the longer we can experience that, right, like that's good for us, and it facilitates the things that we hope for. I'm amazed. David Brooks, has talked about the great detachment going on, and I'll never forget when David Brooks just described, I want to take young people by the lapels. This is a man with experience, knowing what it's like to be in relationships and out, and just tell them don't put off the opportunity of finding these core relationships in your life, because every good thing actually flows from them. They don't inhibit it, they enable it, I think is the important perspective. And that's true for both women and men. We can see that in the data.
Yeah, thanks for that, Janet. I love, Brad, in your piece, you talk about Lillian and really make it concrete. And I know, Janet, you also teach and are on a college campus. Have you seen examples of this at BYU, where you see that, that struggle of, young men and women thinking through how to balance professional, their professional trajectory and all, all of the family and marriage considerations that often get sacrificed for it. Are there, are there signs of encouragement, at least maybe at not a normative campus? I'm sure BYU scores much better than, your average campus on these things, but.
I think Brad's data, Brad and Grant, your data just shows the influence of religion in providing kind of a direction and a structure that facilitates younger marriages flourishing. And so we certainly try to help students understand. It's interesting because I was not a poor married person. I didn't get married till I was 34. Everyone else around me was getting married younger. And I'll tell them, I miss that. I know that sounds crazy. I miss actually those impoverished years together, where what you do is you create this we that's so fundamental to the strength of the relationship going forward. It's very unique than two autonomous people kind of bridging lives, even though I'm so grateful for my marriage and what we've been able to create. I don't want people to dismiss the privilege of, from that place of working hard together to create a life that's the we, what that does for you. That's actually how humans are designed to thrive. So to value that and not dismiss it. So yes, we have all these questions on our campus as well, even though our religious orientation, right, provides a structure that facilitates it. We're still grappling with those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but in terms of kind of the young women, specifically the young women question, and some data that shows that they overwhelmingly think, or a majority of them think that it's better to be single than to be married, to be in a marriage. Do you think that this piece of conventional wisdom is correct? Do we have research that we can draw on to correct the wisdom if it's not?
Yes. Institute for Family Studies in Wheatley, we just gathered this large data set asking about the well-being of mothers. This was the question: is our children going to derail your identity and your development and your autonomy and your happiness and your well-being? And that's a strong message out there. It's why single women would assume that married women, especially married women with children, are less happy than they are. And the data was actually the opposite. And we see it all over the place. We see it in the GSS. We saw it in our own data, that those most likely to be very happy among our women today are married women with children. And it's not an insignificant gap. Now, I recognize many of them are married and more educated than we might have had in the past when we look at that broad view of marriage, and that's facilitative of happiness. But it's so clear that women thrive in deeply bound relationships where they're experiencing touch, the touch of a spouse and the touch of children, where they're experiencing connection to community, bound with the care of their children, where they're experiencing, right, all the meaning and purpose that comes into their lives. Even those who were not married and had children experienced more consistent feelings of meaning and purposefulness in their lives. And that's just the gift of children, right? So I think that narrative is actually the opposite of what's going on in terms of happiness in the United States. And so we need to clarify that for our young women.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So Grant, young men, yeah, there's a lot that can be said here, but yeah, what can you speak a little bit to why marriage is good for young men and specifically younger marriage?
Sure, yeah. Just piggybacking off what Janet was saying about all these data sources, I mean, we just have a remarkable number of surveys that we can go through, and we consistently find these same patterns that we see with young women is the same for young men. That young men report the highest levels, or young married men report the highest levels of life satisfaction. They report being happier, and especially in recent years, we've seen a huge decline in happiness among young men specifically, specifically after around 2015. And of course, this matches the timeline of the social media revolution. And so marriage is becoming more and more protective for the happiness of young men. And there's all sorts of reasons that explain this. As we see with the dating recession, young men are more and more isolated than they were going back 10, 20, 30 years. And marriages, the causal pathways are clear. You're spending more time with the love of your life. And then we also see that marriage really sets men on a path of being a provider. So young men who are married are much more likely to have full-time jobs, and they're much more likely to sort of have this stability in their income that unmarried men do. So it's all these sorts of things that it gives young men identity and protects them from a lot of the things that we're seeing nowadays that are poisoning young men's minds, like pornography, like gambling, like social media. It's clear it's becoming more important.
Yeah, that's great. I should add, I believe you can submit questions. There's a Q&A function in the chat, in the header up there. But if you can't, then feel free to yell at us in some form, and we'll try to remedy that. But we did receive a number of questions ahead of the webinar, so thanks to all who submitted them. There's a couple different kind of broad topics that we can hit on. The first being why we think that delays in marriage are happening now. I know a couple of you kind of touched on this, but if there's anything beyond what's already been shared, just descriptively, what is kind of causing more and more young people to want to delay in marriage?
So I think, Carter, that one of the sort of factors that's driving kind of the appeal of putting off marriage is what I call kind of the Midas mindset. I mentioned this idea at a big address at BYU with Janet a little while ago. And, again, it's a sort of this idea that people are getting, I think more and more, it's obviously amplified oftentimes in social media, is that what really matters in life is not just the great education and, a good income, but really kind of having a career where you can kind of make your mark on the world, Carter. And, it's this sort of Midas mindset that we're seeing kind of, I think, in part drive down fertility and delay or, forego marriage basically in the United States, but it's also really playing out in East and Southeast Asia too, Carter. We've got some good evidence from some scholars in Singapore just talking about kind of how this Midas mindset's playing out in East Asia too, where people are really just privileging, making their mark on the world, especially job-wise. And that I think can make people de-emphasize the importance of dating and love and marriage and family in ways that are really impactful for their capacity to get married and happy. So one kind of concrete example that I actually gave in the New York Times not too long ago was I had an RA at UVA great young man. And he kind of was talking to me about his plans for the future. And he had a very detailed plan about his education, his career, the MBA, consulting, et cetera, for the next like decade. And then I asked him, would you like to get married? And he nodded. Yeah, I'd like to get married. And I asked him, well, do you have any kind of similar plan for, dating and your transition into marriage? And complete silence. And I think the issue was not that he was like a huge devotee of the Midas mindset, but it's become so powerful, at least among a lot of UVA students and young adults on kind of that more educated track, that everything is kind of laid out and oriented towards the career, and there's not the same, I think, emphasis on dating with an eye towards marriage. And we just need to do a much better job of emphasizing the importance of that marriage mindset, even more than that Midas mindset.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brad. Janet, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, that's so well described. I appreciated how David Brooks just clarified. You can build a culture around individual autonomy, or you can build a culture around loving connections, but you can't do both. And what's happened is we literally have built a culture around the autonomous, pleasure-seeking individual is the good life. And so relationships are seen as a threat to that. And I think people still want to marry, but they're in a protectionist kind of orientation around it because it's going to take from me. And I think, and I've got to keep it at bay, right? And manage it in a way. And I think that's just the flip of how humans really are, which is just so clear, especially in a world of isolation and increased alienation, fracturing. You depend on relationships. This is really the fountainhead of growing, of becoming. It's why my student on the front row the other day said, it's why I get off the couch. She is the reason I get off the couch. My marriage to her just invites me to grow up and be better, and how meaningful that is to her, right? And so then you have something so much bigger to give your lives for. But you can't build a culture around autonomy and loving connections. They aren't compatible with one another, right? So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. Grant, I'd love, related to this topic, if you could talk a little bit. You mentioned the dating recession. If you could kind of fill people in on what you mean by that, what our research on that shows.
Sure, yeah. We have some recent research out. There's a fantastic report with Alan Hawkins on this, and Brad Wilcox and the whole team at Wheatley on this dating recession. So as Brad was pointing to, 2/3 of eligible young adults are not dating, and this is a sort of systemic issue. At the sort of same time that they were conducting this analysis, I was looking at high school dating patterns using the Monitoring the Future study, which has been around since 1976. And we found a massive decline in the share of 12th graders who say that they ever go on dates. So in the 1980s, it was somewhere around 85 to 90% of 12th graders said that they go out on dates. And today it's just 46%. So that's a huge decline. And this pairs, it fits neatly with what Brad and others found among young adults, is that a lot of young adults are concerned about their lack of experience. They put it as they say it's a barrier for them to enter into dating relationships. And they're also concerned that they're not going to pick up on important social cues when they're on that date. So there is just a general lack of a dating culture, a culture of romance that has largely evaporated since the 1980s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Grant. So we had a number of questions submitted before we got on today about what we can do more practically to encourage young adults, maybe even just to date, but certainly to consider young marriage as a good thing. There was also one question that was what's the worst thing we can do when it comes to encouraging young marriage. So feel free to take either direction. Hopefully there will be at least some positives, but yeah, would love to hear from any of you. More practically speaking, are there ways that we can start to remedy this? Either a couple of them specified as a parent or a family member, or just more broadly in our communities, or even more broadly as a society.
So one thing I think we can and should do, Carter, is to sort of recognize as parents and as professors, priests, pastors, and the like, as kind of older people, living in some kind of meaningful relationships with young adults today, that we have a greater responsibility, I think, to set people up either kind of formally or informally, and just to sort of host gatherings, in our workplaces, in our churches, in our homes, that bring young adults together to meet one another. And then also, if we think there's some particular person that would be good for someone else, to be more intentional about kind of, making either that, or sort of giving them opportunities to sort of, meet in one way or another, or suggesting that they, seek coffee or grab lunch or whatever else it might be. So I think there's got to be that effort. And then I think we're also seeing two more formal efforts kind of unfolding. There's a new group in the DC area that's been hosting kind of large young adult gatherings of, basically marriage-minded folks. And they're doing everything from kind of volunteering in the community to hosting lectures to, having dances for young adults in the DC area. And so we need to see more of those kind of civic initiatives as well.
We're working on our campus, Carter. I think the president on our different BYU campuses will do date nights. I think it's just rekindling an appreciation for courtship, for dating, for what that looks like, the importance of it shaping our ability to develop deep connections with others. And I have to laugh that our son is just 13, but as part of our church group, he does activities with the young women that are his age every month. And I'm sure he's very awkward. But I can see the structure that's being set up to facilitate understanding the opposite sex in a healthy, structured environment that allows them to feel comfortable and confident. And then that just grows. By 16, it's you ask her out, and then at 18, you're getting more intentional about a more serious relationship. But just giving, we have a vacuum of direction and structure beginning early, even in like middle school, that orients us toward relationships. And I think just a restoration of the appreciation of that and importance of it, that it begins early in life, how we orient toward understanding the opposite sex and relating to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think I also, and Grant is our resident Gen Z expert here, but I do, as soon as I'm tempted to doom about these things, there's some new initiative, often from Gen Z, that pops up about, to try to address these fundamental issues. The latest one, I think it was on Stanford's campus and maybe one other, they're developing sort of in real life kind of dating. I think they're apps or kind of ways to facilitate some of these in real life connection. So I do think that there's a growing recognition too of some of these kind of systemic issues at play, even from obviously young marriage, but all the way back to dating or just kind of in real life get-togethers too. So yeah, Grant, I don't know if you had anything to add about that, but I do think there's some inklings at least of maybe a positive trajectory here.
Yeah, I think it's the challenge with data and summary statistics is you just get the average and you're going to miss the outliers and all the interesting stuff that's going on outside. So sometimes, we look at the data points, but we can learn a lot more about looking around our local community. In my experience, and this just sort of pairs well with what you might see at BYU, is that there are a lot of young people who are dating, who are getting married young, and who are having children. And oftentimes those people are friends with each other. They're networks of people, usually centered around campus ministries, that are doing just that. So there is a lot of hope I see for Gen Z and then rising Gen Alpha. But just getting those, young adults into those circles so that they can have that sort of culture of dating and marriage and having children, I think is essential.
Yeah, great. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, both of which center on and confirm what we've been talking about in terms of sort of negative messages about marriage, specifically for women. So both of them actually, Julie and Dr. Karen Nagel, talk about just wanting lists of, what are the benefits of marriage, especially for women. So I know, Janet, you and IFS co-authored a full research report on this last year, which we'd be happy to follow up and link to. But was there anything in particular you wanted to tease out from what you found in that report that might be relevant to these questions?
Yeah, I think I referenced the sense of meaning and purpose and identity that's part of that, as well as strong ties to your community, that marriage really facilitates building something here with our community. But I think, Carter, one of the most fascinating for me was I study attachment, maternal infant attachment, and you recognize the importance of a biologically rooted attachment early in life. But we don't lose that across life. And I think what we found is that there's regulation biologically that happens when we are in close connection with people that we love. And so just holding the hand of your spouse is linked with oxytocin and decreased cortisol and a regulation of the body for her, almost like she is biologically wired to be in loving, caring relationships that are committed, and that marriage is going to affect her physiological experience. So there's obviously the sense of support and watching over, someone watching over you, and health, all of those benefits that are going to be part of that meaning and identity. But I think just appreciating we are physiologically wired to be in connection, touching others. And when we don't have that, we're not thriving in the same way. So our single, childless women are the most likely to be lonely. They're the most likely to have less sense of purpose and meaning and identity. They're less physically healthy in some ways. They identify more stress. They actually talk about fewer friendships, paradoxically. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot to be said about that marriage culture that facilitates human flourishing, and for women, it's going to show up in all of those ways. Does that give you a list? Is that a list to go on?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, there's lots of I think ground to be tilled here, but yeah, the data is pretty clear. And in Brad, in your piece, we literally draw on young dads and young moms are the happiest. It's pretty cut and dry. Yeah. Anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Carter, it's important, again, there's just this real strong argument out there in many mainstream media outlets. There was a piece by Amy Sher in the New York Times that said that married heterosexual motherhood in America is a game that no one wins. And that kind of, messaging has been really running around the internet a lot in recent years. But Dr. Erickson's work obviously points in the opposite direction. I think we haven't yet seen, though, there's been obviously also this incredible surge in anxiety and depression, among young adults, but especially younger women, in the last 15 years. And it'd be great, and we need to, Grant and I need to get crunching here with Dr. Erickson, kind of to see if we can find something on a data set on that particular question. But my hypothesis here is, and I'm really drawing on a beautiful piece that was written by Liz Brunig in the New York Times on Mother's Day a few years ago, and she was talking about how her life was kind of marked by kind of a lot of anxiety, and then kind of just getting married and having her first child kind of gave her life a focus outside of herself. And that seemed to bring Liz Brunig a great deal of meaning and happiness, but also it seemed like it kind of was almost, paradoxically, soothing in a sense to have, something to care for besides herself. And so I just wonder if kind of on the anxiety and depression fronts, if we begin to look more closely at those two outcomes, if we'll see that there is, a really meaningful story playing out for not just young men, but young women there in ways that'd be, interesting given this sort of tidal wave that we've seen in recent years of anxiety and depression kind of washing over literally millions of young women here in the United States and across the globe.
Yeah.
Carter, it's probably important to acknowledge that I know our students here at BYU who are oriented, I think, typically around marriage and family, that our women clearly seem to have more ambivalence or less sense of sureness that this is going to be a good thing in their lives. There's more fear that it will complicate autonomy and my dreams being fulfilled. And I think all those are real things that we have to talk through.
Yeah.
But I think the paradox is just what we see in the data is different than that, that it actually facilitates an expansion of identity. Like mothers will just talk about what happens to their sense of identity in these lives that they are so enveloped by and connected with and enabling, facilitating their development and growth. So that meaning outside oneself that we've lost track of culturally, there's really no more full expression of that than motherhood. And yet it's also viewed culturally as kind of the most risky thing to do for your development. And I think that's why we just have to grapple with what really it is, as opposed to the messaging that it can obscure, while also, I think, unpacking fairness in marriage and shared work together. And all of these things are really important for the quality of marriage. But we have lost track of the importance of that human connection and the gift that it is to be part of another's life in that most meaningful way for women.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Janet. So yeah, in closing, oh, good. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add to when we look at the timelines on all these things, being the resident Gen Z expert, looking at the Monitoring the Future study, we see young women more than young men say that they expect to get married for most of the history of this survey from 1976 up to just recent years. And it isn't until 2015 that we see a massive decline in the share of young women who say that they expect to get married. And now it's about equal, but the trajectory isn't looking good. So I think it's important to look at what has developed since 2015. We can't help but look at what's the role of social media and the narratives that are sort of driven on there that are causing this sort of polarization on expectation to marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so in closing, I just wanted to ask Brad, Grant, and Jenna if there's anything interesting that you're researching right now or have in the pipeline that you'd like to share with the group.
So I think the big kind of new area of research for IFS in part is just to kind of underline the ways in which the work that all of us are doing, I think, is becoming more important in an age that's become deeply digitally distracted and much more anomic, where people are just kind of living more isolated lives. They're living lives that are kind of more disconnected from community, Carter. And so it's kind of in this newer context that we're all living in today, I think, where we're seeing that the benefits for adults, and I've spent like almost my entire career focusing on the benefits of marriage for kids, but we're seeing, I think, the benefits of marriage for adults and of parenthood actually as well are increasing because they give people an experience of, in real life community, as Dr. Erickson was saying, kind of opportunities for physical touch, opportunities to, have your evenings spent watching, as I often do, your kids playing basketball or ferrying your kids back to, church activities and whatnot. So whereas people who don't have those same kinds of opportunities through marriage and parenthood now, I think are more likely to be spending time scrolling on a screen or, being, by themselves in their apartments or their homes. So I think one of the things we're trying to look at IFS is sort of how much is it the case that socially, emotionally, and financially, family doesn't just matter today for adults, but it matters more than ever. So we'll be exploring that question in the next, couple of years here at IFS.
Maybe along those lines, Carter, I'm just doing work on how the institutions of religion and family impact women specifically, because what we've seen, I think, as Grant, you referenced, we've seen this dip in women thinking that marriage is good. We've also seen kind of a dip in women seeing as religion, that religion is also a good thing in their lives. And yet the data suggests something different. And so exploring what are those narratives and why, and then what are the mechanisms through which these institutions of marriage and religion actually impact in positive ways women's flourishing and well-being, and how do we better communicate those messages?
Yeah, and Carter, just to build off basically both of these, I'm really looking at these sort of what explains this decline in dating among 12th graders and the sort of change in their expectations with family formation, and precisely what, for instance, Brad is talking about how marriage matters more than ever because it has all these protective features about it that stave off modern ailments like doom scrolling or whatever, all this consumption of negative habits. These are also things that are getting in the way of entering into a marriage. And so we see what explains a lot of the decline is just, 12th graders are going out less, they have less friends, and there's a huge increase in anxiety. And that actually explains more than half of the decline since the 1980s. So understanding these pathways is really important then to understanding how do we go back? How do we make it so that 12th graders and then young adults all the way up through getting married, that it's actually possible for them to do that.
Well, thank you, Brad, Grant, and Janet for all of your contributions. Just as a final programming note, you can find the work of the Wheatley Institute at wheatley.byu.edu, and then the work of the Institute for Family Studies at www.ifstudies.org. In the next couple of weeks, we'll actually be publishing a symposium on Get Married Young, just publishing a couple different perspectives on specifically Brad's piece in Compact, but also just more generally the benefits of young marriage. And then later today or tomorrow, we'll be circulating just a one question survey to people who attended this about what topics you'd like us to address in future webinars. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Brad, Grant, and Janet again for your contribution.
Thank you, Carter.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to be with you all.